Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. In this space, it's our goal and aim to hear stories of really cool people. The hope is that in hearing these stories, you and I will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. C.S. Lewis said that there are no ordinary people among us. You and I have never talked to a mere mortal. He was pointing to the reality that each and every one of us bears within us the image of God, the spark of God, and that makes for a life that is indeed interesting. So it's my joy over the next few minutes to introduce you to somebody who is a really cool person. Today we're going to meet Larry Brown. And Larry Brown started life off in a hotel room in Kansas City, Missouri. And he's living here in Springfield. And there is one great story that connects those two dots. So let's lean in and listen to Larry Brown. Today, we are glad to welcome Larry Brown. So Larry, tell us about yourself.
Wow, Jason, that's quite an intro. Thank you for inviting me today. I'm pleased to participate in your project. It all started in February of 1949. I was born in a hotel room in downtown Kansas City, born to a single 21-year-old school teacher from rural southeastern Kansas. I was a secret. She had arranged for me to be placed into at Family Services for adoption. I spent 2 years, 9 months going through foster homes before I was placed with a couple who had just moved to a small farm north of Kansas City, had built a small 750 square foot basement home, and I came to live with them as their only child. I grew up on that small farm, learned that way of life, learned a lot about hard work. My parents were both creative, but they were both driven, had grown up in hardship circumstances, really didn't have any money, but they were good, hardworking people. And I was really blessed to be given that opportunity to grow up there. Went to a small school, got to participate in lots of things, so I had experiences in sports and music and drama, and I was in scouting, had a lot of influences from that, which led me to community service and participation in church. Had a neighbor at the age of 6 who thought I should be going to Sunday school, and she came by and picked me up every week and took me to a little Methodist church in Smithville, Missouri, where I had Bible study really for the first time in my life. And continued there all the way through until I got out of school. In scouting, I had a lot of community service, but it also was very encouraging through my scout involvement to be doing service in my church as well. In fact, I started ushering, I think, at the age of 13 in that church. A lot of kind of fun experiences doing that. But all in all, leaving that small town and going away to college in 1967, 68, there were experiences that caused me to look back on that loving, hardworking, competitive, mutually supporting environment of a rural community. Some things that were really good about it, and then I started discovering things that maybe I would have to explore and question and perhaps take a different direction from some of those people. One of those experiences would have been, I was 19 or 20 at the time. I was dating a woman who had grown up in Utah as an LDS Mormon. She worked for the FBI, a tremendous human being, someone that I was very attracted to and enjoyed being with. And my hometown found out that I was dating this person, and I got calls. I first got a call from the minister that I knew most in town, and he told me that he heard I was dating someone of the Mormon background, and emphasized strongly that I get her converted so that she could participate in a Christian fellowship experience with me if our paths were going to be long term. And then I got subsequent calls from others. And the fact that they were all the same really hit me hard, that, wait a minute, this is more than just, Larry, I think it's a good idea. It's, Larry, this is an important thing for you to do. Larry, this is the way we believe. And it ultimately, in my own mind, I could be in error, but in my own mind, I felt like there was a veiled thread of shunning here, that in that small, tight-knit community of all white people, all thinking very similarly, with a Christian, Baptist, and Methodist church in town, that maybe this idea of a foreigner wasn't so good, and I knew that this was a woman with strong Christian faith, and I wasn't going to challenge her faith, and I wasn't going to ask her to change her faith, and I kind of got sideways with it. Also, in those early years away from my hometown, which was all white, I realized in being around a more diverse culture and working with people of different backgrounds and ethnicities and race, that I couldn't adopt a lot of the feelings, prejudice, I'll just say prejudice, in my hometown. I had a college professor who I'll never forget made a lecture saying that a liberal education is the process of liberating yourself from your own prejudice. And it always stuck with me because I was going through that process at that time consciously, that there are things that I've grown up with that I can't quite accept. And then I began to question a lot of things. I did question my church, and I stopped being involved in the church at that time. I never felt that I left Christian faith. I never felt that my faith in God had diminished. I just felt that people structure thing that was going on there was not something that I wanted to be a part of any longer, because I felt like they were in a space that I couldn't live in, and that I felt that there was an exclusion situation there that I didn't want to be a part of. And so I drifted. Went through my early 20s. I was working at Hallmark Cards full-time. I did graduate from college with a degree in political science and speech. Thought I would go to law school. They wanted me to quit work, go full-time. I said, no, I love my job, and I don't want to go into debt. I hate debt. And so I decided I would keep working with all these creative people at Hallmark because I loved them. My parents were both creative, and it was easy for me to work with them. So I stayed in the graphic arts publishing industry. Then an interesting thing happened when I was around 24, 25. One of the fellows that worked in a neighboring department in the photographics division that I had just casually become acquainted with asked me one day what my church affiliation was. And I told him that I wasn't participating in or a member of a church at that time. And he asked me why. And I'm a pretty open guy, and I had a respect for him because I knew that he was a minister, full-time. In the daytime, he worked at night in order to pay his bills. And so he asked me about that. I told him that I had my reasons, and I gave him a few excuses. And he said, Larry, I wish you'd reconsider that. I do believe that you're letting human issues get in the way of your own spiritual journey and the enrichment of your own life that the church can offer you. And he said, I think you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and I wish you'd reconsider. I looked at him. His name was Greenwood Wilson. I'll never forget him. I said, Greenwood, what makes you so committed to your church and to your faith and your general focus on Christianity, among others? And being a very tactical type of person that I am, even today, he gave me the perfect answer. And his answer was, Larry, God came in the form of Jesus to let us know that we could live our lives without fear. And it hit me right between the eyes. It was powerful. And then he looked at me and he said, it's up to you and me to share that gift. And that was a major pivot in my life, around 25. So I got focused on church involvement again. And I've always viewed the church enrichment of my spiritual journey as really important, and then even more important. But then the service part of me has always been not apart from, in some places an overlap, but also apart from the church. That my community service was always something that I always wanted to help people. And so in that process, I had the next pivot was a friend of mine who was a psychiatrist, and I had hired his services to help my dad, who was going through depression issues and some difficult times. And we became acquainted, and he asked me out of the blue if I would participate in an interesting experimental project sponsored by the Johnson County, Kansas Mental Health Association. And he said it was being put together by a group of oncologists and surgeons and psychologists, and he was involved to work with terminal cancer patients and their families. And the concept was that these doctors would be willing to offer this opportunity for their patients to meet with other families going through the same circumstances that they were going through, and that it might be helpful. And so I agreed to participate in it. I went through a 3-month training. Of course, we went through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and the stages of acceptance of your mortality. And we were confronted immediately in our training that if you don't go through the vision of your own life and end of life, you're not going to help these people who are going through it. So you have to be able to envision that. You're going to have to force yourself, mentally at least, to go through these stages as best you can so that you can understand and appreciate the stages that they're in when you are encountering them. So I went to Hallmark and asked them if they would help me facilitate that. They offered their executive boardroom. And so for once a month, I held meetings at that Hallmark boardroom for families that lived in the northern part of the greater Kansas City metro area. And there would be anywhere from 3 to 5 or 6 families that would come, family meaning a spouse usually, and the patient, and maybe children. And my job was to facilitate the meeting, to stimulate discussion, to introduce everybody, and to see to it that every person in the room was given a chance to speak and had any questions answered, so that no one left unbenefited, if that could be a word used here. It was powerful for me to go through that. It was powerful for me to go through that training because I'd never really given a lot of thought to the full life cycle, the finiteness of our time here on earth, the fact that there really is a time clock, that we've got to get things done, that we've got to do some things. We can't just coast through our life here, that we have to get things done. And so that project came to an end. Eventually, I hate to say it, but after less than 2 years, there were some things happening where people were comparing notes and doctors were hearing what was going on with other doctors. And I think that they felt like they were losing some control over treatment process and mental perceptions of their patients. And so the project ended, but it was a good one for me to participate in, and it had a major impact on me. And it got me refocused on service again because I wanted to do that. Kind of fast forward, I did leave Hallmark after 10 years. I went to Milwaukee, worked for a major printer there, one of the largest printers in the country, and I was a color operations manager there for 2 large plants, a book plant and a big magazine catalog plant. And I was looking for a promotion, thought I had earned one, to be a plant manager in Phoenix, Arizona. And the reason I wanted it was my ego. It was the highest quality color plant, one of the best in the United States. They printed really high fashion catalogs. Skin, and product are very difficult to print and print well. As a color specialist, as someone that was my field, I thought, this is cool, and I've learned it, and I've done a good job, blah, blah, blah. Those are my selfish thoughts. So I went for that. I was approved for it by all the executive team, but the last thing I had to do was go through a psychologist interview, and I had to fly to Scottsdale for that, and went through some testing and some interviewing and with him, and then after about 3 to 4 hours, he said, well, we're finished here. And I said, well, are you going to give me a clue here, or are you giving me a green light for this thing? And he wouldn't answer immediately, and then after I persisted, he said, okay, I'm going to tell them no. And he said, the reason I'm telling them no is not because you're a bad manager. It's because of your management style. And your management style is very transparent. You like to keep people informed. There are a lot of meetings. You want them to understand why we're doing everything that we're doing. And the CEO of this company is a German authoritarian guy, and it's top-down military style. And he's going to see you holding these meetings, and he won't give you the 2 years it'll take you to turn this plant around. He said, so if that happened, and I approved this, knowing that this would happen, I would be hurting the company that we both work for. I'd be hurting your career, and a year or so from now, I'd be going through this all over again trying to find somebody else. So that's not good for any of us. And I said, wow. So I'm not sure where that leaves me. And he said, you got a great profile for sales, Larry. Have you thought about sales? And I said, well, I don't think that opportunity has ever been available for us on the operations side. He said, I can make a phone call, and you'll be in an interview situation soon if you want to pursue that. I said, sure, let's do it. Jason, long story short, I was in sales in 6 weeks, and it was the best career move I ever made because I got to take all of my skills and go help companies and people with their processes, and I loved it, and I did well in it. I'd been in that position for maybe a year, and my boss said, Larry, you need some more background in paper. And so I'm going to send you to a publishing paper school in Escanaba, Michigan. The Mead Paper Company had a big mill there. Really? Yeah, you need it, go. And so I went there, and on the first day of class, out in the woods where we're watching trees being harvested, there was a redheaded woman sitting across from me who was a production manager at Scott Forsman, which was a big educational publisher in Chicago at the time. And her name was Betsy Waddell, and 2 years later we were married. She's the love of my life. Anyway, going from that pivot to joining with her and joining our lives together, we moved several times because of my job, and we moved 3 times for her career. So we lived in 10 cities in 25 years, and we're doing a lot of moving around and dragging kids around. And so anyway, I guess the next thing that happened was about 5 years after we were married. There was a time when we decided it's time now. We got to get focused on having family if we want to do this. And we wanted to do it. So she retired from her work in publishing. And I knew that it would be hard for her to be just in a city somewhere away from her family. Her family all lived in the Dallas area. So I agreed to leave my job, and I found a good sales position with another large printer in Dallas. And so we moved to Dallas so that she could be around her family. We were going through a lot of stuff trying to get pregnant. We spent a lot of money and went through a lot of things. Oh my gosh, in vitro, a litany of things. And we were spending a lot of money. At one point, I had to fly to Houston, and I was going to a specialist there trying to get my sperm count up because it was low. And there was this perception that I might have a circulation issue. And so they had me laying on a metal table, naked as a jaybird. They had an IV in my groin, and there's 5 men and women standing all around me looking up at a monitor watching this dye flow through my veins and my circulation. And I'm laying there looking at this and thinking, is there anything more ridiculous than this? What in the world? Good Lord Almighty, what am I doing here? And on the flight back, I prayed about it, and I came home to Betsy, and I said, "Sweetie, this is crazy. I was adopted. Come on." and what would you think about doing that? She said, "Let's do it." And so we thought we would like to do a South American adoption. Betsy was born and raised until she was 13 in Chile. Her dad was a missionary, and we both thought that a South American child might be good for us. The Lord found us one that happened to be born in Danbury, Connecticut, and brought us to him and to his mother. His mother couldn't keep him, and she was trying to support children that she left behind in Ecuador, and her husband had left her. So we helped her out, and she was thankful that we would take her child. And so we adopted Alex, and I knew as an only adopted child that I didn't want to have one, especially one of a different race. And so I said, we got to find another one. And if we can find one in Ecuador, that would be really cool. We were living in Minnesota at the time, and we found an agency that had a contact in Cuenca, Ecuador, the same city that our son's family was from. And so we ended up flying to Cuenca, found our daughter Lauren was in a Catholic orphanage there, and we brought her home, and we raised those two kids. Children who are adopted, I think, can't help but feel flawed in some way. I know I did. And because of my own experience, I knew that they would never be able to look at me and say that I didn't understand about being adopted. And so I think I've made a lot of special efforts to try to accommodate that part of their own life experience. I avoided moves that I was asked to make to Upper Wisconsin in the Great White North, where they would have been isolated in their appearance. And so I made sure that we lived in fairly diverse areas while they were with us. Anyway, that's kind of the story of us getting going. I stayed in the industry until 2020. I retired. We were living in Atlanta, members of a large church there. Betsy was on staff there in their children's ministry. And I knew that we wanted to find a home in the Springfield area because of our families. But neither of us had family or friends or anybody here. And that made it cool because it wasn't her city, it wasn't my city. It was a new city that we could go to together, And so I went online before we moved and started looking for churches, because that was going to be a big deal for both of us. That would be a big deal for our making a successful move. And wow, I found this church called Schweitzer, and they had Jobs for Life. And I'd heard of that, but I didn't know anything about it. Started researching it. Oh man, this is me. I've gone through an industry that's gone through total collapse. I've been in corporate positions, and I've had to leave companies because they were bought out and bought out and bought out. So I've gone through this whole job search thing over and over again at a pretty high level. And I was very familiar with it, and I thought I can help people as a sales type, as a communications type, as someone who's gone through it, and I think I can help people who are looking for jobs. So I really focused on that. Started watching the YouTube online service with Schweitzer, and saw these 52 stories, and saw staff and production. The service was perfect for me, for Betsy. We loved everything that we saw about it. And so it was like, wow, this is it. We found it. And so as I think you know the rest of that story, Jason, but I do just want to add one last pivot, and that is coming to work in the Jobs for Life program has been a lot more than I expected it to be. You told me early on that the good champions or mentors in that program have longer relationships with their students. And I've maintained those relationships. And And I've had a chance to see people who've been marginalized, who have had a lot of difficult challenges that I never had to face. And it's given me an empathy that I didn't have before. It's given me an awareness of God's creation that I wasn't aware of before. And I'll always consider it a blessing to have gone through this. And I look forward to continuing it as long as I can. That kind of brings us to where we are, Jason. Sorry for being emotional here, but I love this stuff.
Well, folks, we call this podcast Really Cool People for a reason. Larry, you're a really cool guy, and you have taken us on a really incredible journey. And I think you're the first person to ever talk about being laying on a table naked as a jaybird in front of a lot of other folks, and to talk about the struggles of infertility, but also to lay bare your soul. Actually, I think everybody who's come in here has laid bare their soul to some measure, and there's beauty in that. You've talked about a lot of things, and I'd love to go back if you've got the opportunity to ask you some questions about certain things and what you've unpacked along the way. Mm-hmm. One of the first things you said when you introduced yourself is you said you were born in a hotel room. Mm-hmm. So when you go into a hotel room today, do you ever think about that? Like, this is where you came into the world, and what was that like?
Well, I do. I learned that when I was 21 years old. I'd gone to this juvenile court because I was curious. Just learn what I could, and they gave permission to Family Services to sit down in an interview with me and share with me non-identifying information about that, and that was brought out. And I was 21 at the time, and during from the age of 10 or 11, I used to take the Greyhound bus to Kansas City to the public library, and that was my second home. I did my homework there. I did a lot of work there. My dad worked downtown Kansas City, so I was familiar with the area. So at 21, I went to Family Services, which happens to only be about a block from that library, and I went and had this period of time to learn these things. And one of the things I learned was about being born in the Andrew Jackson Hotel. And I didn't know the Andrew Jackson Hotel in the world. And so after the time with her, I walked back up and went up to the second floor of the history section, and I went to the guy. I knew him well. And I said, "The Andrew Jackson Hotel, where is that?" And he said, "Well, it's torn down." I said, "But where?" And he said, "You're standing in it." This was the Andrew Jackson Hotel. I had a comfort level there. I was drawn there. I did all my college work there. It was my home away from home. It was where I spent a huge amount of time. It was really pretty amazing to encounter that. But yes, I've had that thought many times as a traveling person in my career.
Wow. Who could have thought that or imagined that? So you spent a little time looking for your birth mother, or did you ever find her?
Yes, through Ancestry. She did not want to be found, and I'd really pretty much given up on it. There was a time when I got the state of Missouri to appoint someone that would reach out to her and see if she wanted to be found, contact. She did not. And so I accepted that and had given up on it until 2017, I guess. And somebody said, "Hey, have you ever thought about Ancestry? This is pretty cool. It's the old Mormon database, and it's the biggest one in the world. And a lot of people are doing this DNA thing." And in fact, I knew it. One of my clients was the National Geographic Society, and they had a similar project, the Genome Project, where they were looking at migrations of people, where they'd all come from in the world and over time. And so, sure, I'll do that. So I spit in a tube and sent it in, and all of a sudden, they're sending me all this information, and I'm saying, wow, these are real people. And look at this. This is someone on my maternal side and my paternal side. Wow, look at this. And so I started having some correspondence with some of these people through the DNA. So think about it. Anyone else who sends in their specimen, they're willing to participate in it. So I did find someone who was ultimately my cousin, and then I found someone else who was my nephew on my mother's side, and so I ended up in a phone call with this young man who's a preacher, a Baptist preacher in Oklahoma. And I said, maybe you can help me. My mother was a school teacher and was 21 and would have been born in 1927 and so on and so forth. And he said, you're talking about my grandmother. And he could see that we were closely related. So he said, that's my grandmother you're talking about. And it turned out that I had a sister who was born later than me who's now deceased. That was her son. And so then I knew it was real quick to find her. So yes, I did. Then he said, you got a brother. Yeah, I knew from the social worker that I had an older brother our birth mother, adopted him. Anyway, he had been staying with her parents. And so he raised with her. He didn't know he had a brother. I knew I had one out there, but I didn't ever think I'd find him. And so I did reach out to him. And he ended up introducing me to our mother in Lebanon, Missouri, in an assisted living home. And he had to do it carefully, and he introduced me as his friend. And she had given me the name Larry Ray, and he introduced me as Larry Ray, and of course her eyes went. and I got a chance to visit with her, and then I left, and then he went back in the room, and she said, where did you meet that guy? And so he said, Mom, that's your son. There's no getting around it. That's your son. It's in the blood. There's no questioning this. He's your son. Oh. She'd been trying to hide this. Wow. It was one of the reasons I wanted to find her, Jason. Yeah. I knew she'd have baggage, and I wanted to free her of that. Yeah. And I wanted to say everything turned out okay. And I wanted to thank her for carrying me and giving me a chance. And it was lovely. I got to spend, 8 or 9 or 10 visits until she passed away in 2020. And so we got to know each other, and she came to full acceptance, and it was cool to spend the time with her. I probably got 30 or 40 hours with her. Wow. So it was cool. Yeah, and then I went on. I was able to find a relative on the other side, and I know that my birth father was never aware of me. It was a short-term relationship that he had with my birth mother, but I did. I just entertained my half-sister, his only daughter, in marriage at our house here last week. Lovely time, and she's shared a lot of information about our dad. And he did work for the government, and he was a rocket guy, and he was in top clearance, and he bought all the parts for rockets, and he was closely involved with the NASA Apollo program. And she brought lots of medals and awards that he had won and commendations that he had gotten from that activity. And apparently he was a pretty cool guy. And I definitely got a lot of skills and things. So this whole idea of inherited and acquired, it's still, there's a lot to still be learned there. Now I've learned through ancestry that my tastes for things are definitely in my DNA. They can tell you whether you're a coffee drinker or not. They can tell you what certain things taste like. They can tell you if you have a strong taste for sugar. Anyway, it's been a cool experience, not just to find my family and to make these acquaintances, break through the barriers, because there's always a hesitance. It's like, oh my God, who's this stranger from out there, And I have to say, hey, I'm not looking for anything. I'm just curious. And if we happen to have a friendship after sharing some information, fine. If not, it's okay. And it's been a good experience in learning to meet all of these family members, and they're cool people.
Wow, that's incredible. Really, really incredible to think about. I've got several cousins that are adopted, and so they've got, I'm sure, some of the same questions that you've had and wonderings. Your parents that adopted you,
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever find out what motivated them to reach out and take in a child, and what was deep down in their hearts, and what were some of the things that...
Well, my mother had grown up in the city, and as a sophomore in high school, her dad died, and she had to go to work to support her mother and baby sister. And she lived a rough life, but she did it, and she was strong, a very strong person. And my dad had grown up in the country, but worked in the city, and they got married and so forth. But his goal was really to go back to the farm where he'd grown up, and he was able to buy the farm from his brothers and sisters, and they built this little basement house. And so he moved my mom to the country, and she was not a country girl. She was didn't know how to drive. She really wasn't well prepared to do that. But I think she probably only agreed to do that with the intent that they wanted to have a child, and that they had tried, like Betsy and I had tried, and they finally decided that they wanted to go the adoption route. And she had when Betsy and I were trying to have children, I remember before she passed, she said, "Larry, until you have children, you're selfish. You need to do that." She kind of pushed me into the whole idea that you need to do that. It's part of our life progression. You need to do that. And I think she felt that way. It also gave her, I might be really off base here, but I felt looking back on it that she was a driver behind me. She pushed me to get my Eagle Scout. She pushed me to do a lot of things, and that I may not have done without her absolutely an indomitable force behind me. And I think that there was a vicarious element to that she didn't get to do those things, and that she wanted to experience them, and she wanted to be a part of that. So I became a vehicle for which she could do some of those things that she didn't get to express in her life. My dad was just a happy-go-lucky guy. He liked everybody. And he was a great, loving dad, and I think he'd grown up in a big family, and so I think he also felt like it was important to have family and to have kids.
Mm-hmm. They too. It's interesting how, you yourself raised the question or the topic of conversation between that which comes to us through genetics and that which we're imprinted upon by the people that we're around, and those kinds of experiences. And both are so profoundly important and life-giving, life-shaping along the way. Mm-hmm. You mentioned then this girl you dated when you were in your early 20s, and that experience of what some people might call a very narrow understanding of faith, and you had wrestled through to a broader sense of orthodoxy, a generous faith. How did you get to that place?
Well, as soon as I learned that she was LDS, I started back in my library home trying to do as much research as I could, because I knew very little about Joseph Smith and that whole story. And I quickly learned that everything I read was partisan. There wasn't an objective article to be found about the Mormon history, about what they believed, about almost anything about them. It was either written by Catholics who were very, militantly opposed to them, or by Mormons who were promoting themselves. And it was like, man, how do you get through? It's kind of like politics today. How do you find an objective position here? So in going through that, I thought, well, okay, let's just distill the facts. Let's look at this. Let's look at, is there anything about their current practice? Because from a practical standpoint, if she and I were going to be together, are there going to be some things that are going to be very difficult here for me? or that I can't accept. Well, number one, the whole old argument about polygamy, my goodness, they outlawed that in 1850 to become a state. Their president had it. I don't mean to say this with a tongue in cheek, but he had a timely revelation that God was telling them they needed to end polygamy because they needed to be a state, and the United States wouldn't bring them into the Union until they did. So, but that those were old things, and that having grown up in Clay County, Missouri, Joseph Smith was in jail in Clay County, Missouri, and oh my gosh, they were run out of there. I mean, their belief that the second coming is going to happen somewhere near Trenton, Missouri, up north of Kansas City, is just amazing. But so their beliefs were very different when they were in my area where I grew up, and they went to Nauvoo, Illinois, and he was murdered there. He was big in the Masonic Lodge, kind of interesting. Quite a story there, but I couldn't find anything that I personally would find in the upbringing of this woman. Her mother was a Methodist, her dad was a Mormon, and interesting story there. But her schooling was similar to mine. I was at Warrensburg, and I came back to my dormitory from classes, and the dorm mother came running up, Larry, there's an FBI agent in the hall waiting for you. And oh gosh, whoa, and everybody's got the big eyes, wanting to know what's going on here. And so I went to sit down with him, and he was doing a long interview with me, checking on her, because they were in the process of hiring her, you see. And they were very thorough. And anyway, I'm just saying that I knew that there was a vetting process. This wasn't some bizarre person from Mars. This was a human being that absolutely, in my opinion, was living a Christian life and had a solid value structure that I appreciated and that I didn't have a problem with. And so after spending some time with that, that was my first experience to look and say, well, maybe, living in that little confine of that little town in that little place and those three Protestant churches and being in their world at that moment in time, that maybe I was not there anymore. I was in a different place, and that I learned that I needed to be that I could accept people that were different than me, and I viewed her difference no different than I viewed the difference of someone's skin color or ethnicity or anything, and that this is a human being. This is one of God's creatures. I'm no better than she is, for goodness sake. That's what got me there.
One of the interesting questions along the way somebody asked me was, how do you do this? And I'm still not quite sure how I would answer that person on the day when they asked me that question. And so it's fascinating to me that somewhere in God's grace there's a gift or a curiosity, something that's given to us that expands our view, maybe even beyond what we can see or bring to the table ourselves. And so I really appreciate your exploration there and your wording where you said everything was written that you found was partisan in nature. And so the question is, how do you dive through the partisan to find what's real and what's true and what's good and lovely and beautiful?
Exactly.
So,
and the answer is in the human.
A couple of more questions. You met Betsy, the love of your life, in Escanaba.
I did.
Have you ever seen the movie Escanaba in the Moonlight?
No,
or seen the show?
I haven't.
My wife is going to kill me for suggesting. Stars Jeff Daniels. It is so weird. It's like watching a film from Mars. I don't know. But if you ever want to revisit your Escanaba days,
okay.
Escanaba in the Moonlight. One of the things you said about Betsy in a piece that you shared with me, written piece, was that Betsy introduced you to one of your best friends and her dad.
Yes.
And you didn't talk much about him in this conversation, but
yeah, he was a cool guy. Other than being my father-in-law, he was a very cool guy. I wish he were alive for you to interview him here, because he would have a rich group of experiences to share, and my admiration for him over time came from the choices he made in his life. He made a lot of choices, and a lot of big choices, difficult choices. Choices that would cause him to leave his family and everything he knew and go to South America away from everything and give his life in full to his commitment to Christ and to serving others. I also liked him. We loved to debate. We had fun doing it. He was, I guess, on a scale in today's kind of political environment, he would be pretty far on the left side. And I'm a fiscal conservative, and a proud one at that, and a debater. So I'm more than happy to sit down, and we could laugh and love and respect each other and still talk about facts and not people, and enjoy it. And I enjoyed being able to say to him, Don, we're trying to get to the same place. We just have two different paths to get there. And he would laugh, and he'd hug me, and we had a very close relationship. Yes, Don passed this past year, and I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss all of the visits, the shared experiences. I'm going to miss his love. He married us. We got married in Columbus, Ohio, actually outside of Columbus, Ohio, on a little Japanese garden in an arboretum at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And it was Don and his wife, Betsy's stepmother, and my adopted parents, the six of us. We drove in my car out there. I was a photographer. I set up a tripod and did the photography. Thank goodness it turned out really well. And he performed the service on this little beautiful island with these birds chirping, and he was a plant tree guy, and he loved being there. And it was really a kickoff of a relationship that he and I went on to enjoy for 39 years. Yeah. I hesitate to talk more about him because I wouldn't know where to start. He was after serving as a missionary teaching native Indians in South America how to farm. He was a Texas A&M grad, and he was very serious about his horticulture and husbandry. But after working with those people for a few years, he then asked if he could come back to the States and go to seminary and become ordained. And then he went back to Chile, and he was assigned to different churches. He had multiple churches at one time there, and so he served there until Betsy was 13, and then he wanted his kids to go to high school and still get an education in the States, so they came back to the Dallas area, and so they became kids in school here with very different perspectives and language and a lot of kind of funny things for them having a foreign focus to see us as a very different focus. It's really kind of interesting to ask Betsy what it was like to come to the States having been in a different environment. School was very different there. The most popular kids were the kids with the best grades.
Wow.
We could talk for an hour about that.
Yeah.
There was no bad boy syndrome there, She would wear the same clothes 2 days in a row and be heavily criticized, like, you don't do that. What are you doing? And it was something that would have been practical to do there. Mm-hmm. And anyway, but yes, Don had to go against his launch in the perspective, in the metaphor I used here earlier. In the way he was raised, because he was raised small town, southeast Texas farm kid, very, very different than the world he chose, the life he chose to live was very different for himself than what he had been raised in. And we both could share that together.
Mm-hmm. As you think about your life together with Betsy and the kids that you've got now, what's something that you hope to leave to them as a legacy, or maybe 2 or 3 things that they will hold dear, that you will have shared with them?
Well, Jason, I do believe in life by example.
Yeah.
You know, that old saying, don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see. Makes me laugh to this day, but there's always a little bit of fire in that smoke. I believe that we have to show an example, and that's probably the best we can do, is to show an example. If I believe something, then by golly, I should live that. And if I say it and I don't live it, shame on me, because I'm really not passing it on to my kids or anybody else. So I'd say that kind of reminds me of children's stories. In World War II, there was an Anglican minister named Wilbur Awdry. And he had a son. They were being bombed by the Germans, and he had a son that he would console in the evening and tell stories to. And he created a group of stories that would be appealing to little kids at that time, and they were about the railway system in Britain. And he personified the engines in the railway system. Those group of stories were picked up in the 80s, and in the 90s there was a TV series that came out called Thomas the Tank Engine. And those were from his stories to his son. And if you were a tank engine in those stories, and we used to read those to our kids, if you were a tank engine, the greatest compliment you could ever that could be made about you would be that you were really useful. And that always stuck with me. I love that, because I think if we're going to serve God, we got to be really useful.
So the final question that we've asked people in this series is, what's a final word of advice or wisdom you'd like to share with us? That's a really good piece. That's a great piece of wisdom you just shared. But
I think it would be a lesson I'm still learning in my life, and that is that we have to be careful not to make quick assessments of people. That there's always a story behind the human being, and that it's easy to be impatient or quick to label somebody or to put them in a category in your mind, good or bad. It could be wrong either way. But rather than to be quick to assign some kind of judgment or to categorize people, allow for the fact that they're very unique human beings. And they're God's.
That is so good. Larry, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jason. I appreciate this opportunity to share.
Thank you for listening to this conversation with Larry Brown. And a big thanks to Larry for sharing his story. In listening today, I hope you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, and that you begin to behold and listen to the really cool people that are around you. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. And if you'd like to give listener feedback, we'd love to have your emails. You can find our emails at schweitzer.church. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.